and thank you very much indeed, Peter, for that kind introduction. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. A very august room, a very reflective room, and very critical room indeed for the role and engagement across curriculum, pedagogy, in pivoting our direction, pivoting South Australia and contributing to Australia's direction in ensuring we are prepared for the next wave of a transition which none of us can completely see the shape of, but all of us are aware that STEM, and in particular maths, is the key. So I'm just going to, in a sense, take a step back. I'm going to look at some of those forces at play that are both about economic and non-economic transition, social transition, that has been part of a momentum partly in the last century and moving into this century. Now, indeed, economic transitions have been with us since human society walked on the planet. And I love this piece. This comes from a McKinsey report, and it is a piece of work which looks at the shift in the economic centre of gravity. If you ask me how they measured it, I may not be able to answer, but they did a very detailed piece of work to come up with where at different points in time was the economic centre of gravity of the planet. And what you can see, and it's intuitive, we would, as we grapple for knowledge of our ancient history, less ancient history, and more modern history, we would see that path of the economic centre of gravity around the East. Absolutely, as whole knowledge fields where education was prized, and indeed the field of mathematics, whether we're speaking of Islam or Babylon or Egypt or ancient Greeks, there was a huge uplift in the respect for how to understand how the world works and how to apply an ability to put that into a science, or at that time a philosophy. And we saw with the Silk Road across this period of time that real holding along the Silk trade routes of the emergence of the use of that knowledge, and particularly the need for numbers if you're going to understand tax and tax traders on those routes. I had a wonderful Christmas where we spent a week in Jordan. For those of you who may not visit Jordan, I found it a most remarkable place, including Petra. And including when you walk into Petra, you're immediately aware of the position of this treasury, the building that's carved literally into the face of the rock, but how much business went through that treasury. And to have business going through treasury, you need a high level of capability in being able, across many different cultures, to be able to understand cost and price, and underpinning that was all of the emergence of how different cultures were harnessing the ability for place value of numbers. So we have the emergence from this path of civilization and then pulling in this direction. Absolutely clearly the beginning of that industrial revolution to the West. And so the West began to massify production in those steam, firstly by steam and then later by electrification. And of course it was pulling towards the West, and in particular at that time towards the UK as it emerged as a hub of innovation, with steam starting, water power beginning to help increase production. And so that pull began to drag across and got accelerated through the times of the World War and now pulled across to the US, with again an uplift in science and engineering and maths, adding value to economies, creating innovation in economies, the huge development in the US of railway transport, huge wealth associated with connectivity of trade routes, only now by rail, and indeed around this period of time, we're seeing that whole burgeoning sense. And for those of us who have only known, and that's most of us, from the mid-last century, for us it has always been clear that the West has always been a dominant economic force. But of course, history tells us that we are always on the move, and change and transition occurs. And so now we see the pulling back to the east with the remarkable emergence of strong ASEAN focus on building a new middle class, new education, empowered by most recent technology, and of course China as a behemoth, both in terms of producer and markets. And around this time, of course, as this moved across this direction, so too did manufacturing move offshore from the US, from Europe, and into cities and centres in the east, where prices were cheaper, labour force costs were lower, and indeed so the challenge to the West emerged. And I think it's worth putting this in context because that economic dynamic was both fueled by STEM and impacted, again, on STEM's response and how communities and nations and jurisdictions began to look to science and technology and engineering and maths as their solution. Now, in the global context, this is sort of nicely, in a sense, captured by that sense of the advanced economies that traditionally were the rust belts and made stuff, transitioning to knowledge-based economies here. And now those economies that moved more quickly are deriving more than 30% of their economy out of essentially those STEM-based, IT-based industry sectors. Now, Australia has actually been buffered across most of this time. And so we've not, in a sense, felt the chill wind too much because our commodity base, our products were being consistently sold, particularly coal, particularly iron ore, particularly things we dug out of the ground. And so our standard of living in terms of being bolstered by terms of trade. But that's changing. We have now seen that the future is no longer in a market which seeks to actually have fossil fuels. We see that there is no longer a market prepared to pay some of the high prices for the traditional manufacturing, and so we've seen the change across cities as automotive manufacturing has by and large closed, and we have felt more rather later than some of the other parts of the world that sense that productivity and doing things differently is now going to emerge. But we are doing that in a world of a 21st century citizen, where young people see the world in a very different way. They see their future as different to our past. And so we now have economic, social forces, values, systems being part of a churn of change that is very much going to shape, in a sense, how we view our next phase, and in particular, the role of innovation, the role of science, the role of maths within that, serving not only how we understand how things work, but how we understand how we work and how we wish to see a future different to the past. Some parts of Australia have been more sharply exposed than the rest of Australia, and I've just spent 7 years as Vice-Chancellor at the University of Newcastle. And this is in the Hunter region, and it's a region very clearly low education participation, very exposed to what has been major changes, of course, to coal. It's both its production and in terms of its export, and therefore its ability to change more quickly, along with Geelong, along with Wollongong, in a sense, have been the front runners of the changes that we will see across the country and in larger cities such as Adelaide and our other capital cities and in our region. But our regional exposure is often sharper within a state than our metro exposure, and we have been working through that in collaboration as collective business leaders in Newcastle for at least a 7-year period. Now, one of the pieces of work, and now what we're doing is trying to unpack, in a sense, what could we learn? The thing if you come slightly later, you're not a first adopter, is you can at least learn from what other people have done and perhaps what not to do and what to accelerate. And I was going home from the university. Life as Vice Chancellor is kind of, it's not dissimilar principles. We just, some days are not as good as others, let me say. And I had a pretty tough day. Those days you get in the car, you're going home, you're going, oh, God, you just want to go home, put your head against the wall. And, all sorts of complex issues, often people issues are going through your head. Turned on Radio National, 9 o'clock, turning out beautiful Bushland campus, off we go. Let's go home thinking, is there any food besides a stale piece of cheese in the fridge? And on the news, not on the news, in an interview rather, was this person, Antoine Bilatnal, talking with the interviewer about how and in what way he, as an investment banker, and his co-author, Fred Bakker here, who was the editor of Financial Times of Holland, had heard from clients that manufacturing was moving offshore, but these clients were in Asia. They thought that's counterintuitive. Manufacturing moving back to the US, moving back to Europe. They didn't believe it, being quizzical, thoughtful, intelligent people, so they went to prove it. Antoine wouldn't say he's a scientist, he's an investment banker, but clearly he's a scientist. He went along with Fred to do the experiment, do the case studies. They did 37 case studies and found indeed rust belts were now transforming themselves into what they call brain belts. I came in the next morning, I said to the chief of staff, Chris, heard somebody on the radio, yeah, it's a bit late, I think his name's Anthony, something like that, and I think he's written a book, and it's about rust belts. Could we see if I can contact him? I went, yeah, good, thanks, Caroline, great. Anything else, to go on at all? No, that's about, well, of course. Thanks very much, I'll be back. He's very good, and of course, like people do, found his Twitter handle, as you do. And anyway, found myself talking with Antoine, brought him out, didn't bring him out, said, look, would you come out to Australia? He hadn't done a case study in Australia. And so they came to spend a fair bit of time, very generously, helping us understand the way in which to approach change. And what they had distilled in their 37 studies, that the areas that had been able to navigate to a new future, Akron, Ohio, place where big trucks came through, huge, large wheels in those trucks, center of production of those wheels, center of production of tires. But when the route changed, the trucks stopped coming, Akron faced absolute plummeting economy and joblessness. And so the university was the center of polymer science based out of all the understanding of rubber and tires. And that began to be a centre around which they began to relocate new industries into Akron, Ohio. They needed joined-up leadership, government support for that basic research. It didn't have to be in a top 200 university. It had to have deep specialist knowledge relevant to the area. Had to have traditional manufacturing skills, people who knew how to make stuff when you wanted to make new stuff, an appealing living and working environment. Okay, so that's worth reflecting, and indeed at the heart of every transition has been the ability to deploy new knowledge. The heart of the new knowledge has been maths. This other piece has been happening across the last many centuries, and particularly and within the 21st century, the role of cities. Cities have changed from being part of those trade routes built around to make sure people could have pit stops, hospitality industry, sell products, souvenirs, all of the things we'd be familiar with now that was happening across those trade routes. Then cities built post the Industrial Revolution, the smokestacks and the warehouses and the ports at driving business, to now cities built on people and changing the dynamics of our cities to reflect the needs particularly of what we would call young wealth creators, 25 to 40-year-olds. And I don't mean people who are rich, I mean people who are creative, innovative, and who are driving the next phase. Pittsburgh, there was a piece of work done about magnet cities, and it was done with 160 cities by KPMG, and we brought the author out actually to Australia of that report because we wanted to understand in this transition what were the key elements of being a magnet city. Pittsburgh was on its knees as a Rust Belt, and it lost its steel manufacturing. It has now transitioned, and I visited it. It's a remarkable city. It's lively, it's buzzy, it has been really true to its DNA and its blue-collar origins, but it has managed to bring through a grounded, authentic approach, but to bring through a whole swathe of new industries where traditional manufacturing skills are helpful, but that drive in artificial intelligence and automation in sensors is really driving that economy. Steel and the ability to understand manufacturing has translated into robotics. Massive, about $1 billion worth of commercialization in medical devices and technology and products. They say they've gone from steel to eds and meds. The role of education really profound, but they've kept who they were. They've kept their identity. And for people coming to a city, they don't want anonymous land. They want to know what sort of city this is and that it is true to itself. Now, those magnet cities are sticky for talent. And so this study looked across economic characteristics, jobs growth, gross domestic product, R&D spend, and population growth, as well as these wealth creators, people who are coming up with ideas, making patents. Maybe they're not going to go all the way, but then some do. And concluded that a relentless focus on attracting young wealth creators contributed directly to a city's economic growth, and that there was a specific relationship between cities and those who choose to move there. They're the physical cityscapes, they're social networks, they're peer groups, they're people you meet in restaurants, they are networks of like-minded people, and they need to have this vibrant lifestyle. Throwing up a startup space, a couple of new apartment blocks will not draw new people in. And you can see cities across Australia that, in a sense, are driving in that direction. So it's really key that we begin to think of when we have a creative industries company, when we have Institute of Machine Learning, when we have the SAMRI. Imagine the space where people are emerging into the next phase of their careers, seeing this next world, and be able to share and talk about like technologies, like approaches, like algorithms, and also the creators within that. Now, all of this is happening at a time for us in terms of that social-cultural background of this Industry 4.0, of which we've heard much. I always am slightly concerned I can never remember the first three industrial revolutions, to be honest. Why there are three of them? I always just thought there was one. Turns out no, there were three. And they are distinguished by what they used to really mass produce. Here it was water and steam. Here it was electrification. Here it's really getting autonomous production through the cyber connectedness of electronics and IT. But this last space is much more about the interconnectivity of cyber objects, the Internet of Things, things that speak to each other, that physical environments, so being able to create 3D printing, being able to create larger structures, but informed by multiple inputs, and particularly interfacing with biology, particularly interfacing with chemistry. There was an example of oligo-snoop. Those of you in biology know the sequences, base pairs, imagine just think of the small sequences or oligo sequences. And when you make new DNA, to make new products for the environment, or to make new products in medicine, you synthesize and you put a base pair onto each other. It's very commercially sensitive, so it's all under very tight cyber security. except that in this particular century, with the current techniques, people were able to hack into the sequencing and thereby the commercially sensitive products because they put microacoustic devices. So when you're on a machine that's adding base pairs, apparently every time you add a different DNA base, it made a different sound in the machine. So you only had to decode sound. It's a bit like Turing back just doing very complex IT, but this isn't so complex. All you need to do is listen. So the connectivity of our environments at the moment is both a additive to our ability to do things and a concern to our society. So what is different, I think, from the prior revolutions, although they probably put up a similar slide, had they got a slide with something similar, which would have said that today's advances in digital technologies, it's not just about manual manufacturing labour, but every sector of the society. And for those of you who think that this is a little bit science fiction, every time I can say, I've been on a myriad of research grant interviews, every time I thought, that's a bit out there, that's not going to happen. I'm a predictor in 3 to 5 years, it will happen. I'm absolutely the benchmark for that, as we all are, because we find it a bit hard to project ourselves out beyond that time. Meanwhile, while that's been happening, and this is where we're beginning to see a world where disciplines, and I think this is the key part of this, are less, in a sense, uniquely identifiable in their context. Knowledge of the discipline is necessary, but it's placed into a context where it needs knowledge of other disciplines to converge, to come together, to create. And so what we have here in healthcare, this came out of MIT. NIH brought together the meeting at MIT and said, look, we have the world's greatest powerhouse of health and medical research. And that is actually true. 2, we have unsustainable healthcare bills. 19% of our GDP projected by about 2024. That's not sustainable. Why is that so? If we have great technology, why is it not actually diminishing, bringing down the cost of healthcare? Now, we can debate the American healthcare system, but nevertheless, it was a good question to ask. And reasonably, what they came through with a very large study is they just weren't harnessing that powerhouse across all of the disciplinary base. They weren't bringing the health and medical researchers together enough with the engineers. Facial recognition and facial muscle movement at the heart of diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Unless you're actually in the room in the physics or maths department or IT department, rather than in the biological or health sciences room, you're not going to get that convergence of information. And it's those technologies which are now moving us forward, particularly as we get more and better at brain imaging, and understanding of early emergence of some of the most intractable brain diseases we have. So what this basically said, and just in case education isn't hard enough, we now have to converge. Okay, that will be straightforward for all of us, particularly universities, because we don't have dynasties and tribal wars between disciplines at all. No, absolutely not. Okay, so convergence of disciplines. So how to get the maximum out of the intelligence in the room that knows disciplinary in a deep way, the team, the strong part, to get comprehensive frameworks that merge areas of knowledge. And it's different from interdisciplinary research. It goes beyond collaboration to integrate historically distinct disciplines and technologies into a unified whole. This is coming. It is with us now. It is not going to change. How we navigate it, what we consider the roles of disciplines, the convergence piece, how do we separate all of that out into a stream of systematic exposure of students at all ages. And of course, we all try and get away with that, oh, well, it looks like it. It's not exactly convergence, but people are talking to each other, good. So it may not develop a transformative impact. It's actually something fairly bold. And of course, as right back to the 1st or 2nd century AD and before that, we have to overcome rivalries, dynasties, warring chiefs, who were very clear to espouse the role of their discipline above all others, and the role of their faculty, school or department over all others. And so this is a cultural transformation, which in part is being pulled forward currently as we speak. I just divert into South Australia, just going to say the powerhouse we have here for that convergence, if we get it right. This is a measure of how much the world views the value of what your research is. One is if you're at the world standard for your field, and anything above one means you're in the Olympics, and anything above 2 means you're in the finals. Above that, you've probably got a couple of gold medals in the cupboard. So physical sciences, this is South Australia, all of South Australia's research outputs between 2009 and 18. How good are we against the world? It's a fair question. This is from all research outputs. Doesn't matter whether it's a university or research agency, all of it that come from South Australia. Physical sciences, gold medal. Mathematical sciences, pretty impressive. I would say gold medal because I couldn't bear to think of the few that would happen if it didn't. ICT, impressive. Engineering, impressive. Medical health sciences, impressive. This is a very, very good starter base for quality and translation and convergence. And of course, you know, in the city, that what we're now building is, as it were, a health translation precinct with SAMRI here, with 2 major health and medical research facilities in this part, that's the west end of North Terrace. To the south, we've got Tonsley and Mitsubishi precinct. I think it's one of the most fabulous health translation areas in robotics and sensors and automation I've seen. This is up the east end, we've got the photonics and advanced sensing. At the east end, we've got the machine learning, and reasonably, all of that, if we can connect and get the maximum convergence from it, places South Australia, highly connected, strong DNA, creative, good social values, in a very strong position. If we don't, we'll just be nicely steamrolled. Okay, so that's the first bit. So the first bit is thinking, moving forward, what we need. What do we let go of? What do we bring together? And where are we looking within preparation for students moving through into this, which we can't even foresee ourselves? Luckily, there are bodies in the world who do foresee, and they foresee pretty accurately. The World Economic Forum does a very deep dive. It's a sort of synthesizes all the movements across the globe, applies tight criteria, what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years that's going to impact on societies and communities. Every time they put out their annual report, we go, they must be dreaming. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to happen. 3 to 5 years later, it's happened. And just to show you that, this was about 13 or 14. What they said was going to happen in 15 and 17 was mobile internet and cloud technology. Who knew? Advances in computing, big data, new energy supplies, Internet of Things, advanced manufacturing, crowdsourcing, advanced robotics. Well, they picked well. So, by and large, there are deep dives to allow us to understand the forward momentum. Artificial intelligence and machine learning a bit later, and we're about there now. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And advanced materials, biotech, and genomics, which is rounding ahead. If you looked this year, what they said, the most recent year they predicted, obviously, was 2018. Don't worry about the reading. It's more about what they're now predicting. And remember, this will happen. That's, I've accepted it, and it's how we point towards it, and what do we need through curricula at any level to look at that. Augmented reality, only much cleverer. Really, really being able to be deployed at a high level, particularly in health. Personalised medicine, advanced diagnostic tools, read high data science, IT, algorithms and machine learning for that. Artificial intelligence-led molecular designs, never mind, I spent my life as a scientist, biologist, trying to work out what drugs might work from, what molecules might do what from first principles. Apparently, if I'd had a machine, they could have told me using first principles but working quicker than me, and we'd have got there quicker. Yeah, a bit challenged by it, but nevertheless, probably would have been much useful, a better way to spend the time than on those Excel spreadsheets. Okay, so molecular design. Artificial intelligence that can argue and instruct, well, great, you know. That means we can argue with them on the phone too. Implantable drug-making cells that you can protect from the body's immune response, send it into a tumour, deploy it by hitting it with an activating pulse of light, and then it will do its job within that tumour. Very impressive technology. Lab-grown meat, interesting. Electroceuticals, stimulating the vagus nerve, does good things to the immune system. Gene drive, taking this up a notch from the CRISPR editing technology. Plasmonic materials, a whole new way of producing energy. I find it quite I have read about this, I've gone into the technology, very impressive. Is it where we should be buying shares? I don't know. And algorithms for quantum computing, quantum, coming through strongly from the out there to the Australian of the Year, and now coming into normal everyday talk. So our world and our graduates, whether they be primary school, secondary school, university, mature age students, this is their world that is shaping around them, and cities that seek to bring the high value roles informed by high value STEM. And particularly at the heart of this is data, the heart of this is handling data, predictive analysis, and beyond that into, if we think of space technology, I understood that in 2016 they translated a Babylonian text that showed a calculation on the orbit to Mars. I find that staggering. So human beings have been created. The context of the time they're in means things have to all wait until you've got all the bits to converge before you can do that Mars mission. Now, just a little bit here, because artificial intelligence comes up a lot, and like most of you, I really have difficulty grappling with what it is. And most of you probably are really across it. But when I get asked to talk about artificial intelligence, I have to pause, because it means different things to different people. I want to talk about this because it's underpinning social and industrial change and our own lives. And then that will impact, of course, through to health and the environment. So artificial intelligence is big, it's always changing, we think we've got it on top of it, and then it's moved another notch in terms of technology. We've seen Alexa. I don't know many of you have got an Alexa. You wait till she begins to argue with you. Yep, see it's coming. Yep, no, don't do that. Don't open the fridge now. Oh, please, Alexa. No, I'm sorry, I've locked your fridge. Internet things connectivity can just go so far because you asked me to. I didn't. I heard you ask me to. You didn't. Yes, we can see where this is going. Okay, so reasonably this is there. Online search optimization, of course. Amazon that takes over everybody's business once they've understood their customers. They then just take the customers. And medical image analysis, of course. So it's used everywhere in our lives, very diffused. So I actually think it's tough. At its simplest, we're trying to build machines that think and act like us. Weak is, well, they do it really in a very narrow context, and we're impressed by the quickness, but not by the cleverness. But strong AI, intelligent machines that can reason. They have absorbed within this, again, convergence of different strands of different disciplines, particularly maths, logic, probability, statistics, optimization, photogrammetry, neuroscience, game theory, and the list goes on. And it's being applied, so you've got this technology coming from many disciplines that's also being applied across many fields. There isn't a field here that won't interact in our lives. And we've got a whole raft of responses to it from government who want to be competitive and have the powerhouse that this represents for all sorts of environmental, health, and economic outputs. Industry wants productivity, community is confused, worried, and sees privacy and ethics at the heart of this. A very complex field. Now, this is a graph which I promise I will take you through 3 pieces of, but I think it's important because it tells us how in maths and science and IT, work comes from across the world to create whole new fields, which then impact our lives. Let's look at 1998. This is a big piece of work that took from the ground up lots of all the world's millions of publications that had ever touched on the field of artificial intelligence and separated them using their own keywords in the paper to see what fields brought about these changes so we could understand the move of technology. Okay, right back here in 1998, lovely time, nice time. I remember being Dean of Science at University of Adelaide around this time actually and trying to deal with difficulties between who knew, biologists and mathematicians. Biologists had lots of students, mathematicians didn't. One thought they shouldn't be doing all the work for less money and the other thought they should be maintained because they are the discipline of the future. Both were right. Yep, you know the role of a principal and thing, how to solve it without with maintaining the best, let's say, of all parties. Okay, 1998, simpler world. In that time, this big swathe of work was going on computational linguistics and language processing. Okay, people probably thought, well, if they want to do that, let them. Here we have artificial intelligence was really just this bit here that people were talking about it and hypothesizing about it. This little bit here was about neural and evolutionary computations, so small there, multi-agent systems. Here, down here, computer vision and pattern recognition wasn't even on the board. Machine learning is this little bit here, tiny, tiny bit. Little tiny bit of robotics, little nothing really in information retrieval. That was the world pre this. And this shows how researchers across the world connect in their own ecosystem, sharing, swapping, converging technology, know-how, math, data, intelligence, IT, algorithms. Let's fast forward to here. Very little left of computational linguistics. Now what we're seeing is artificial intelligence, look, it grew. It was being used as a term, and now it isn't, because, not because it's gone away, it's matured into these two primary fields. Machine learning here, machine learning actually here, and computer vision here. That's computer vision, and that's machine learning. Now that tells us we went from language here to vision and facial recognition, and we've been able, these two are now dominating the technical innovation and robotics, and we've just seen an increase in the statistics aspects of machine learning. That's becoming more important than the sound. What happened across this period was we got a smartphone that we could engage with, where it understood our voice. And what's happening now, if you go to airports across the world, your photo, you're being scanned as you go, you have to give paper. So I'm in China, which I've been in a fair amount, checking my bags through. As I check my bags through the security, they have my face on the screen. And they're looking at whether I am that person from the image that's been taken. And if you are in a store in China, in Alibaba, what they call offline stores, which I quite like, offline stores, yeah. We used to call things online. No, I think it says moving forward. And in Alibaba, this is a company I have the great privilege and pleasure to work with, actually because the founder, Mr. Jack Ma, had a very close relationship to another Castrian family, very generously supported through a gift of more than $26 million scholarships for disadvantaged Australian students. So became aware, went to Hangzhou to see Alibaba. This is artificial intelligence, absolutely on steroids and in the future. In one day, a single day in China, they did $30 billion worth of e-commerce. The first order was distributed within 8 minutes to the customer in Washington because they had all the algorithms work to know where the customers would be, what they might buy, and what to therefore prepare the distribution workshops for. So now facial recognition, if you go around David Jones and you look confused and you think they could organise to not have that mirror there, and gosh, could they just change that rail? Actually, currently what they're doing is looking at how you track, you move your demographic, and then setting it up better for you. All of this, and this isn't actually at David Jones, just in offline stores for Alibaba, just letting you know. I'm not sure it will come, actually, yeah, but it might. So, interaction, therefore, between what we produce in knowledge, what gets taken up, and what impacts our lives, and how we respond to it. So, we're looking at that artificial intelligence. Back in the day, we had home robots for cleaning. We thought that was great. I still do. It's all right. They're better now. Apparently, I don't think they argue with you. You could have cleaned this better. What did you put this under the sofa? Yes, that would be helpful. But no, these are now moved forward. So that was our first kind of beginning for self-driving cars, speech recognition on smartphone. All that work delivered this. Now all this next phase is delivering the next phase, and so it goes on. And we're in the middle of those phases with students and with curricula that look a little tired. And so the work you're doing as a group and in the state, the intelligence that you're bringing to that, the way in which we begin to think about this, not in a fearful nor holding back the tide way, and not in a welcoming all comers in technology, but how we help the 21st century citizen navigate their way through is key. Now, I just thought I'd, just by way of the next phase, which is really interesting. There's a young man, Lewis Mitchell. He's a mathematician at the University of Adelaide, and he talked at the Pint in Science event. I don't know if you were at the Pint in Science event, it was great. And he showed, and don't worry if you just see a bit of a blur because we'll take you through it, what his group, working with groups in Vermont and other collaborators, trying to understand how we work through artificial intelligence, in particular happiness. Happiness. Great, I'm feeling happier if they just think about me in the, sensor technology in my room. Less kind of happy about them thinking about me, understanding my happiness. Sounds a little Big Brotherish. There's a scale here, which is a bit visible. It's got a sort of 5 to 6. So what they've done is they've trawled lots of words across lots of dimensions, about lots of people. What word is neutral? The is neutral. What word is sad? Tragedy. What word is happy? Christmas Day. And they've worked through, trust me, this isn't your average survey. This is a massive data set. And what they've then done through people's tweets, yes, through their tweets, the state of happiness in a country, a region, a city, a part of a city, there is no barrier to being able to understand, indeed, what we as humans respond to and why. And so this is Mother's Day, good on us. This is Thanksgiving, this is Christmas, I like that. There's Mother's Day again as we come through. So, all good. And these are really challenging situations. So these are, be it a particular attack in Charlottesville, mass shooting in Texas. There are President Trump tweets about nuclear war. Right. I'm surprised he just doesn't have his own on the feed. Sorry. So reasonably guilty verdict for multiple trials and a shooting. So this is really showing how we respond. And it also shows our resilience, how some communities are more resilient. Their baseline is higher, they're generally positive, and our baselines are lower. Kind of neat, I think that's good, nice project, never going to go anywhere, till you see their Nature Human Behaviour paper, which is out this year. And what it turns out is understanding the human condition in the 21st century. Information flow reveals prediction limits in online social activity. Now, if I can translate this to you, it's a hard read. For the maths teachers in the room, I welcome you to it. I found the introduction good. I quite like the summary at the end. The maths in the middle, gosh, tough. However, it is deep maths. So what they've done is they took 13,000 users who are at the middle of networks, and the network consisted of a user and their 15 most frequently mentioned Twitter contacts. And they had 30 million public postings, 30 million, okay, to work on. And what they actually found is that you can use those tweets to determine just of their social type. So the nature of the social engagement shows 95% of the potential predictive accuracy for an individual. Understanding what an individual thinks of something is achievable only using their social network's response, where that social network is typed. even without their own data, which is remarkable. We can be identified through our tweets in our random crazy lives to a 95% predictive capability of what we believe in. And you will all come across the big data centre in Griffith, which has predicted every election correctly and predicted the last federal election correctly because of the way in which, not people were saying I'm going to vote X or Y, but because of the way they were responding or clicking into or sending on their messages coming from all of the parties. So this goes beyond Amazon and shopping for us and making choices for us. This goes right to the heart of who we are and where there are profound areas of disadvantage, where there are profound areas of change and social innovation. This is the next phase. And what they concluded was that our information is so strongly embedded in social networks that in principle you can just profile us from our ties even when we don't go on the platform. Great, good to know. Excellent. So therefore, in this land, what are the challenges we're walking into and the next generation that we are part of preparing and walking into? So let's look actually at what, as it were, the previous generation. These are CEOs. So all of this might have been happening but hadn't happened, and they certainly wouldn't have foretold it. It would have come in the possibly, but we're not going to bank the company on it. So they did a survey of, this is a Harvard Business Review, 64 CEOs, business executives representing major companies. So this has weight in people with very large commercial responsibilities. They believe that 72% of their companies have yet to forge a data culture. 69% have not created a data-driven organisation. 53% are not yet treating data as a business asset. 52% are not competing on data and analytics. And the firms that identify themselves being data-driven has actually, if you look at it, not gone up that much. So we go 37 and then it drops, and then it drops again. In other words, people have become more aware of what being data-driven is, and they're less optimistic that they are. So the future is with people who understand the complexities, and I mean true mathematical complexities, that go into the application, but go into the pure development of maths formed around the challenges of the sort of data sets that really only this generation have come to see and face. And for us, as a country, we are not that dissimilar to the big US voices there. We have the potential to increase our productivity. It can be transformative in all sorts of what I might say are environment friendly, health friendly. The products can have social value. 9% of Australia's listed companies are making investment net, 9%, and 20% in the US and 14% elsewhere. These figures are changing as we speak. 80% of our Australian SME are not sure about adoption of technology, and we've got two major studies coming out of the academies, the learned academies, on how we are going to respond to this. Maths is at the heartland. But these are figures you know. While that's happening in Australia, here we are with figures from the Prosperity Through Innovation report across here. Here we are looking at science, PISA scores going that way. Here we are looking at maths, PISA scores going that way. Now, lots of good debate, as there should be, about any scoring system, any database, any comparison. But you would feel more sanguine if it wasn't going down, no matter its provenance. Happening at the time of government funding for schools has increased, whether the baseline was too low and we're not an optimal level yet can be discussed. But this has captured, it's a graph that captures, against the backdrop of what we've been discussing, a pretty critical piece. You know the ANZI's report, and you know your lived experience. Advanced maths has declined student base by 20%, and by 32% since 1995. The time that all that AI was going on, we were losing students in advanced maths. Inequality in the maths performance of students is worsening. Maths achievement, we know, is aligned to socioeconomic status. Students who start off behind their peers never do catch up. Half the students just don't like it. And they don't like it more than they don't like science, which I don't know what to feel as chief scientist, really. I think not good. Australia's international position has declined. So it's an interesting part. Sometimes what I used to appreciate in Pittsburgh when I asked them, you know, how did you come from, you know, looking at rusting steel, old steel mills, polluting the Potomac, the rivers, just how did you come to change? And they said, you know, it was a near-death experience. So we just had to put everything to one side, get together and address it. And sometimes this feels a bit like that. And sometimes it gives you license to, in a sense, do things and experiment, because repeating what's been happening clearly, which hasn't worked, may not be the right answer. We saw in that report the opportunity, improving pathways to send graduates into teaching, supporting schools to access specialist teachers, review of the curriculum, and industry in STEM. I know Martin will be talking a lot through this. But I'm not sure that we can wait as long for all of these changes, and many of them are being implemented, of course, as we speak, but there would have to be some other issues. I'm also worried, as a Vice-Chancellor who's been at a university which had 3.5% Indigenous students, 28% from low socioeconomic background, that what we might end up doing is making our good specialist maths such a good prerequisite for everything we do, which in principle I understand the rationale, and locking out those students because they were in the wrong school at the wrong time. Family wasn't too worried about whether or not maths, STEM was going to be the direction, and we can't have a two-speed economy. So I actually think you can balance excellence and equity, and I think we have to bring that strand in for Australia. And I don't see much attention to that, and I have had the opportunity to talk through this, you know, with those people who do think prerequisites are the answer. They're part of the answer, but they can create another problem if we don't do this wisely. So I just wanted to finish now, just a look at actually what people who are in study or in work who want to study want to do. Because I think there should be much more plurality of pathways available, but deeper pathways that expect more than a bridging program or a quick fix. I see no reason why calculus is the provenance of the young. There are lots of people who are more mature, who are actually really keen to understand the universe, who want to understand how and in what way we can make new drugs for different conditions, and cancer and heart disease. We have people who want to dig deep and dive deep. And somehow we've made our curricula often so incremental that if you miss a step, you have to go back and do year 12 to do that piece. Most 40, 50-year-olds may want to understand what's in the year 12 curriculum, but they may not want to take a year 12 credential. So I think we're all alert to this and we're all thinking it through, but that particularly impacts the very people who didn't have a good year 9 and 10, not to mention didn't have a year 11 and 12, and yet they're bright and they want to be part, and they're thinking it through without that disciplinary framework because they are some distance from wanting to, in a sense, go back to school. So let's look at these workers, and what we saw when you ask people, what did you want to do when you were in work and who were interested in future study? Currently, those people, 39% have a bachelor's degree. They weren't thinking of that much in their study plans. More were thinking about a postgraduate qualification, interestingly, a little uplift in PhDs. But here is where you begin to get into non-credential training and credential training as being bigger parts of their future plans than their past qualifications, and then looking at multiple qualifications. So So people do want uplift. We all do. We are all interested. We are human beings. We are inquisitive. But somehow we've got a rubric and curricula that once it's in place for one group of people, our school students, our university students, we simply want to repeat it again in the same context for people who want the material but not the context. And just to remind you that currently, and I'm hesitant to trade this until we've got something better, universities get a lot of flack, and we deserve it all, of course. But the one thing I think we should acknowledge is if you look at women with Year 12 qualification, this is the proportion that went into technical and managerial positions, those with a bachelor's degree, a much more significant proportion. This is over 3 consecutive years of graduations. Here's men, again, a proportion of men in that managerial professional region, and again, the same for men, although higher than women. The graduate premium, as a consequence of that uplift in role, is about $1 million over a lifetime. Now, and unfortunately, currently the vet qualification doesn't offer that. So my sense is that putting a value on what this value adds to your lifetime's earnings is not a bad one, or what you're doing that you want to do, and are you carrying a professional role with it. And I think these sort of data are really helpful for us, the reality of life, rather than the reality of what we want to teach as university educators or schools. Finally, this is the 21st century graduate. The 17 development goals for the UN, the United Nations, for the 2030 agenda are absolutely front and centre in every person around below the age of 25, and for many of us above the age of 25. And any curricula has to be in that context, equitable prosperity, healthcare that can be distributed at lower cost interventions, and environmental sustainability initiatives. I just wanted to mention, this is an example, one of many. He's a young man who's in the mines in Western Australia. He passed year 11, worked for the mines in 15 years, in a forklift driver. And he came to the University of Newcastle. He enrolled in an open education program to get an enabling qualification to do teaching or nursing. The staff there suggested he should actually think of doing science and maths because he was very good at it. He was very hesitant, but he did. And he took out the university medal in science. And what I was able to see at that institution, which for 30 years has been making sure that you don't change the bar, you bring students up to the bar. So Indigenous students in medicine, law, engineering, maths, science, absolutely normal there. Absolutely the expectation. A huge commitment to working in partnership. A huge commitment to working with schools in the region. Talent is everywhere, it's opportunity that's not. And many of us in this room, day after day, are thinking, what opportunity can we provide this talented person? So finally, I think conversations about the challenges, about the fourth industrial revolution are underway. The higher education community now has to start an imperative conversation, and that's a conversation that's been started in primary and secondary education about how to reshape the system, to capture the needs of the entire community, to pursue that lifelong learning in a different way than the way we've thought of it before, to get the necessary skills and competencies and contribute to this society. And the final piece, which is our challenge in maths, which I'm going to show you, is this. Okay, final graph, because I like graphs. This is the proportion of all research outputs presented from mathematics and computing sciences in Australia across this period of time. It's the proportion now. I'm going to move to what it's a proportion of. So this is the proportion of those publications, the proportion of female authorships on those publications. So the proportion of male and female authorships in total that were female authorships. Okay, that's great because we've solved women in STEM, haven't we? Yes, we have. Except that the proportion of all authorships were female authorships. Look, the best university in the country is at 17%. This one is 4.5%. And if you look at this, nobody is performing. You know, sometimes I always worry when I'm in a table and we're talking about women in STEM and people get excited about double digits, you know? It's a diagnostic. So the average here for for this group is 12.5%. Now this possibly reflects, it's about the same proportion of women in STEM who are professors in maths. But this hasn't changed since I came in 1975 to do a science degree. Sure, the world had changed. Sure, the world had changed. Just before I came in to take up my education in science, Dorothy Hodgkin, a woman, no less, had been awarded the Nobel Prize in Science for her work in biochemistry. And the headline in the newspaper at that stage said, "Oxford housewife wins Nobel." And I was pretty sure things would change. Well, this suggests, and I can show you more depressing figures. I have plenty of them in engineering and science, but I thought you might be excited by this one. And reasonably, what we're doing is not working. So, I don't think we can have any confidence that what we've done has helped women to adapt to the system. My own personal belief, having been in the system a very long time, well, if it hasn't worked, let's change the system. And essentially, I think it's now time for a professional body. I trained in medicine. We had colleges that made sure, for instance, if I was trained as a surgeon, look, I came back 3 years later, I wouldn't come back as an intern, I would come back at the level to which I was credentialed. And so I think it's time for science and maths to think of themselves more as professions and begin to structure the program through life that allows the professional body to ensure that your career is reasonably secure, you're reasonably well remunerated, and you can't just hang up your shingle to say you're a data analyst if you did year 7 maths. And reasonably, although I'm sure actually some of the year 7 is pretty good. So reasonably, I think when professions are in secure employment conditions, women are just impacted disproportionately, and this is something I will be challenging. Thank you very much.